After the Civil War, the South had lost their large labor force, which they used to mass produce agricultural goods such as cotton. And this was largely due to the fact that after the Civil War, slavery in the South had been abolished, and they no longer had a large labor force, which at the time was primarily made up of black slaves. So because of this, white landholders had to essentially scramble to reestablish the industry that propped up their economy and control over a large labor force. So this led to the rise of sharecropping. And sharecropping is a practice in which a family rents a parcel of land from a landowner in exchange for a portion of their crop to be given to the landowner each year.
So the Civil War greatly impacted African Americans at the time. Many slave owners sent their slaves to go fight in the war for the Confederate side, and many of these Confederate African American soldiers actually ended up running away to the Union lines, where they then became free in the Union states and would fight against the Confederacy. And then so after the war ended, the slaves, whether or not they were still on plantations or fighting, really had no economic resources. They had no education, ways to get around. They couldn't read, write, or really do anything besides farm work. So they sort of ended up staying at their plantations and going to sharecropping.
Sharecropping impacted newly freed slaves because they were not enslaved anymore and they could finally get a job, and poor whites because they could finally hire their social class with sharecropping because it was a new job. Another impact was that sharecropping was a one-crop thing, which means that they only harvested cotton, which exhausted the soil because sharecropping was a global thing in the South. So therefore exhausted all the soil in the South, which was a negative impact. But in all, sharecropping impacted mainly poor whites and newly freed African Americans.
In 1865, William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15. The order set aside 400,000 acres of land for free people. Many former slaves moved on to the lands, and many thought the land would be theirs forever. However, it was not to be. When Andrew Johnson became president, he took a lenient stance on the South, and in fall of 1865, he overturned the order and returned the land to various white planters. Some freedmen attempted to remain, but they were suppressed by former slaveholders, ex-Confederate soldiers, and sometimes federal troops. Mostly Republicans solely believed in wage labor and did not believe that freed slaves should be given land, so they did not interfere much. However, some Southern Republican governments attempted to break up large properties and give land cheaply to poor whites and blacks. For example, in 1869, roughly 14,000 black families gained land through a program in South Carolina that brought property and sold it cheaply to people without land. Additionally, in some upper southern states, some black people did manage to gain property, but even then it was difficult, and the Reconstruction measures started to be rolled back. The situation became even worse.